Welcome, everybody, to 52 Living Ideas. I am delighted to have my friend Aaron Lewis, and he's going to be talking about the Temperance Alley Garden, a project that he's been working on. So I'm going to hand it over to him shortly. He's going to give us a tour. Then he's going to talk about, he's going to show us some pictures of the events, etc., in the garden, talk about his ideas about the garden, and then I will do a quick interview with him, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. All right, that's the plan. So Aaron, it's up to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Khan. It's good to be with you all here. Welcome to Temperance Alley. I'm coming at you live from Washington, D.C., the U Street neighborhood of Washington, D.C., which is in the northwest part of the city. And my name is Aaron. I'm an educator, architect, and a designer, and a placekeeper of the Temperance Alley Garden. And today I want to give you all a little walkthrough of the place and share about what this project has been like for the last few years. This is my first time doing a video tour, so we'll see how this goes. Right now we are in Temperance Alley, which is a historic alley in Washington, D.C. And you can see it doesn't really look like too much. There's a lot of trash dumpsters and city urban life. We're right on the other side of U Street, which is one of the most poppin' streets in the entire city. Lots of urban life, lots of clubbing, lots of partying. And so it's always surprising when we tell people that there's a big garden right behind U Street and a place where people can gather and experience a little bit of the wild, a little bit of nature in the heart of the city. So, welcome to Temperance Alley Garden. Here we are. I thought for our little walkthrough, I could show you how the garden functions as a meditation machine. Meditation machine is a concept from Christian monasteries that I've been learning about. And basically, how it works is that the architectural layout, the architectural plan of a space or a building functions as the structure of a little meditation. So as part of the tour walkthrough of the alley garden, I'll also just lead a little meditation that goes with each room of the space. So by way of a little bit of introduction, Temperance Alley Garden, it's a project of my neighborhood association, the U Street Neighborhood Association. And it's a pop-up park. It's an ephemeral place. So when we first got here, this place was empty. It was barbed wired, it was locked up, and it had been that way for 15 years. I always point out when people first get here, there's asphalt parking lot poking through, and all throughout the space, like 1 or 2 inches underneath the soil, is parking lot. So in the 15 years that human beings were not allowed into this space, all of this plant life regenerated, rewilded on top of the asphalt, sort of like a scar healing over. And when we first got here, I live in an apartment right at the end of the row here. When we first got here, we were like, what is this giant unused space doing in the middle of the alley? Why is there no community access? This was towards the beginning of COVID. We really needed an outdoor gathering space because people were socially isolated, quarantined inside, distanced from their neighbors. And so we started wondering, could we get the space opened up for community events, community use, so we could learn how to neighbor again and practice the art of being together, even during this pandemic time. So we got in touch with the developer who owns the land. They've been planning to build housing here for a long, long time. And so we worked out an agreement with them that would allow us to temporarily animate the space, bring it to life, while they're waiting to get all their permits and all their proposals and projects approved. So we have a 3-year lease on the land, which we're coming to the end of. And it's really an experiment to see what it feels like to activate a place for a temporary park, even though you know it's going away, what it feels like to care for something that has a limited lifespan, but still showing that it's worth it because of all the life that can happen. So that's a little introduction to the project. When we enter here, we enter into the welcome circle. And this welcome circle is a little labyrinth, a little place to center and arrive from the busy hustle and bustle of the city. And the role that it plays in the meditation is to just think about, call to mind something new, something that you're welcoming into your own life. So the welcome circle here, we have some neighbors coming in. Our welcome circle here, we've found a lot of artifacts and fossils while we're on site. And so we've actually hidden a bunch of the artifacts on site in the rock garden here. For example, we have this old clay pipe, which was made out of this was an old water pipe that was made out of clay from the city. So we find all kinds of interesting things when we start digging underneath. So I always encourage people to see what's under, because there's a lot of layers of history on the site. As I mentioned, the site is called Temperance Alley Garden. That's the historic name of the alley. It's been that way since the late 1800s, but it fits well with our theme of temporariness, the Temperance and Temporary Alley Garden. So walking through our arbor here, the next room of the garden is the lawn. And the lawn is where we do most of our social gatherings and large events. Our events model is very open. So any neighbor or friend of the garden or person who encounters this space is invited to sign up to host an event here. And we call it an outdoor classroom space, a learning landscape for the neighborhood. So people come with ideas for things they want to host, and we pretty much say yes to everything. So we do a monthly music concert series, performance art. We've transformed the space into a stand-up comedy venue. We've had a fashion show, turned it into a runway. We also do all kinds of like art and crafting and workshops. I personally host the cloud watching club, which is where people come invited to just lay on their backs and enjoy the performance of the sky one evening. So everything from really low-key events like that, where people are just given permission to wonder, to more intense things like we hosted a candidate forum for the city council race here as well. So it's really wide open for volunteers to bring what it is they want to share, whatever they're learning about, whatever they want to create a gathering around, is what this space is for. And temperance, I like to talk a little about temperance, because temperance originally in this context referred to the temperance movement, which is associated with prohibition and reduction of alcohol use. We're not allowed to distribute alcohol on site. And that's been a really interesting, actually, design constraint for events and gatherings, because normally alcohol is like the default center, the default thing that a sort of gathering or party orbits around. And in the absence of alcohol, you have to come up with a lot of creative creative centers, creative ideas, creative centers of gravity that can hold an event together beyond just like drinking together. So the way that art and creating together and learning has filled that role has been really beautiful to see. Last thing to point out here in the lawn space is we have these wild meadow beds on either side of the lawn. If you get close and show a little bit of the grasses here, and we always say that the wild meadow beds are like they're temporary housing for our insect neighbors and all of the ecology critters, birds, bees, pollinators that make use of the garden space. So moving on to the next room of the garden, this is the pavilion. And the pavilion was the only structure that was here when we arrived. And the meditation in the pavilion is a place of rest and restoration and rejuvenation. So you can maybe call to mind a place or a person that's restorative for you as we walk through this space. You'll see on the ground here, we have lots of chalk decorations. Chalk is our medium of choice because we're an ephemeral place and we're also an outdoor classroom. And we always encourage everybody who comes in to leave a little mark on the bricks here, just as a way of practicing a little bit of creative agency with the space. These bricks were all completely covered by grass when we first arrived. And we started digging one day and we found these hexagon bricks hiding underneath. And so I love it as an example of design by revealing, and this type of design that you get through this weird combination of like many years of neglect combined with stewardship and care that comes in later on. So I call it the reanimated or the rewild ruin. And it feels like we get to design alongside like all the many other people who are in this space before us, all the many different layers of history that are here. So this pavilion, I was told, was built in the early 2000s by volunteer lawyers on their day of service, which is probably why it's kind of got some bends and kinks in it. But it was built here because they tried to build affordable housing on this site in the early 2000s. It was rejected by the zoning board. And then they started hosting farmers markets and artist markets here. And so we get to kind of like coexist across time with the many different layers of use that this space has experienced, which I really appreciate. Moving now into our farm. We have a full-blown farm in the back of the garden here. And you can see the stained glass hanging here, which was made by one of our neighbors. She taught a stained glass workshop. We all learned how to put this piece together and hang it in the garden. So the farm area here is where our community gardening happens, our neighborhood gardening happens. We have many different leafy greens and vegetables growing here. If you were here in person, I would tell you to come and rub your fingers on a tomato or an herb to get a whiff of smell. So maybe imagine that. And for this part of the meditation, you can just call to mind something or some food that's really nourishing for you. In our farm, what's unique about the model is that we don't have individual plots. All of the beds are actually stewarded in common by our neighbors and volunteers. And what that means is that it's a really good way for people who have never practiced urban farming before to come and learn alongside people who have a lot more expertise. So on Saturdays, everybody comes together to care for the beds for some education around what's growing and how to farm. and everyone's invited to take home a little bit of the harvest home with them. And then on Wednesdays, we do a harvest that gets donated to the local food pantry. So it's a nice mix of being able to take some of the fruits of your labor home with you, as well as putting your hands in service to the local community. So that's our farm cafe area. Moving now towards the back of the garden, we have what's called the story circle, which sits underneath this Bucky Fuller style geodesic dome. And the story circle, this is where the past of the garden gets to speak. So we've designed this story circle around this portal to the past, I call it. There's a giant stone underneath here, which maybe you can see, and a bunch of bricks buried as well. And we thought it might be actually a stone left over from the buildings that used to be on this site back in the early 20th century. So in the story circle, I like to tell a little bit of the history of the garden site. There was 26 tenement houses on this site, and on the one right next to us, starting in the late 1800s. And these tenement houses were occupied by basically right after the Civil War. There was a huge migration of recently freed enslaved peoples from the South to DC, and they settled in alleys like this one. The high society is very unhappy with alley life in the city because it was perceived to be um, it was perceived to harbor a lot of vice and debauchery and crime, and so there was a lot of advocacy to clear the alleys completely. People like Woodrow Wilson's wife would do what she called slum tours around the city, trying to get these houses completely cleared and demolished. On the flip side, there's a lot of really beautiful, interesting history about the culture that happened in these alley lives, the music, the extended family networks, the religious life, the play, the games. And that was often invisibilized. But eventually the alley eradicators were successful, and this lot was cleared in 1953. All of the families who lived here were displaced, moved to other parts of the city, and they had no real idea of what to do next with the site, which is why it eventually became a parking lot, eventually became barbed wired and locked up in the state that we found it in. So we're trying to bring a little bit of the alley life culture back to the alley while we have the space. And I always say that when we're standing in the story circle here, we are sitting in what used to be somebody's living room in the past, and we are also standing in what's going to be somebody's living room in the future, because the development that's planned here will be building townhomes right where I'm standing. And right now we have the blessing to enjoy it as a garden space in this special little window in time. So story circle here, it's a place where we gather as neighbors to come and share stories, kind of campfire energy. It's a very opinionated architecture because the form of this garden room is built around a very specific event and activity. So we have this little, I'll show you this little toy here, conversation toy called the uvula, which is a ball attached to this string that hangs from the top of the story circle, and you send it around. We have a facilitator for the story circle who will share a prompt, and then neighbors can share memories in response to the prompt. And so we send around the talking piece to stir the pot, and then when you got something that you want to say, you grab it and share, and then keep on sending it back around. That's a little piece of the story circle. So our last center, our last room of the garden, it's the time capsule. And time capsule sits in the back of the garden in this treasure chest here. And wow, we've made it all the way to the back. You can see it's quite a journey. Um, the time capsule, since we're a temporary ephemeral space, I always encourage people to leave behind a little artifact, a little totem, a little memento of an experience they've had here, a feeling they've had here, something that they've created or shared or made. And so our time capsule is almost like it's like a little seed vault. It's a seed vault, but for gatherings. So if and when we pop up in another place, we'll be able to plant all these ideas for neighborhood gatherings, for neighborhood building in the new place and bring it to life, there. Um, and I think that's what's been really beautiful about the temporary nature of the place is that we're always invited to live here and play here with the end in mind, and to really imagine and think about what can happen after its death and how it can be transformed into new life. Um, the the cool thing about temporary nature as well is that even though this physical space is temporary, it provides a temporary habitat and way station for all types of wildlife, um, to get the chance to establish itself, to propagate, to seed. And so this place, even though it's ephemeral, it has ripple effects in the local ecology because of the opportunities that life is being given to bloom here now. Um, so yeah, that's a little introduction to the Temperance Alley Garden. And the gates are always open for you to come visit if you find yourself in Washington, D.C. It's wonderful to show you on video, and it would be even more wonderful to be with you in the place in person.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Give me just a second here. Hold on. Okay. So what I was thinking of doing, Aaron, and tell me if it makes sense. What we can do is that we can, move to the apartment, continue the interview, and then we'll have other people talk. And if necessary, we can come back here. Does that work?
Sounds good.
Okay. All right. So if you could proceed to your apartment, and then we will go ahead and continue. So it'll be just a minute or two, folks. What Aaron is going to do is that he's going to walk to his apartment. He has some pictures that he would like to share with us. He has, pictures of the event. So that gives crucial piece of, you can visualize what actually happens in the garden. So that, and I want both these pieces to be together. So we've seen the garden looked at the garden, and now we're going to see what has happened in the garden. And then he'll be talking about some ideas about it. And then I'm going to do an interview with him about everything that he has said. And then we will open it up for questions from the audience. So please keep track of all the questions. If necessary, this is just, this is basically his backyard. So if necessary, we can go back into the garden to answer some of the questions. So just hold on to your horses, and we will be, Aaron will be back shortly. Oh, there, that was quick. All right, so go ahead. What would you like to show us?
Oh, well, I'll show you few pictures I put together. So you can see a little bit of the life that happens in the place. So as I mentioned, I call it a window in time. We're gardening this construction site and we're constructing this garden site together.
Can you
Here
blow
you
up
can
these?
see,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just blow them up a lot. Yeah, perfect.
here you can see sort of what it looked like on day one when we first walked into the place. And this from the same point of view, what it looks like in full bloom. So I thought I could just share really quickly 4 design principles that we've held with us as we've built up this space. Here's a little collage of some of the goings on in the garden and the way that it's been animated by our neighbors. The first is that we move at the speed of relationship. So when we first started building in the garden, our neighbors were a little skeptical at first because it's a giant empty lot, a few 20-somethings just messing around. And they wondered, like, are they going to be hosting giant raves back there? Are they going to be doing big rallies and parties? And so the first step was really to form relationships with our immediate neighbors, with the other members of the neighborhood association, with the families, and get a sort of collective buy-in and consensus around what the space is, what it's for, and how we can build it together. And the other key piece with moving at the speed of relationship has to do with what is the point of building? Why are we building? We don't just outsource all the building to a contractor so that we can get the construction finished really quickly and then enjoy the space. The idea is that we actually come into relationship through the practice and the art of building together. So even though it might be a little slower to build up a space with a bunch of neighbors who maybe aren't professional architects, we actually come into closer relationship with each other, and we're able to come into more aliveness with each other through the practicing the art of building together. So here you can see some early stages of building with our neighbors' kids here. The second big thing is this idea of living the blueprint. This is something that I take from Christopher Alexander, who's a really wonderful architect and design philosopher. And the idea with living the blueprint is that we do all the designing and sketching, prototyping of the site on the site itself, not on paper, not on a computer, but really just sketching what are ideas for the rooms, the layout, the architectural configuration of the site by creating a basically 3-dimensional blueprint that we can live inside of and feel and experience. So here side by side, you see picture taken from the same spot at 2 different moments in time. One where everything's being sketched with really simple materials, twine, rope, bamboo stakes. And then on the right here, you see what that sketch looks like when it's all colored in and the materials get upgraded with the soil and the bricks and the plants. So it's really about the slow coloring in of these sketches that take place on site so that you can live in them, feel what they feel like, and then bring them into brighter and fuller color alongside neighbors as the place takes shape. That's living the blueprint. The third is designing by revelation or revealing. So we spoke a little bit about the various portals to the past in the garden and the ways that there are all these layers of history in the place, and the role that the story circle plays and the role that the history of the site plays. So here you can see some old historical photos of the families that lived in the garden site. You can see an aerial photo of the garden when it was parking lot. You can see what I was saying about revealing the bricks underneath the grass here. So the principle here is that the garden, the space is already full, and we can learn so much about it by revealing the layers underneath, revealing the past, and providing portals to local historical memory for all of our neighbors who come, so that they have a sense, and we all have a sense of when and where we are in time, and a connection to the past and the different lives that this site has lived prior to our being there. So that's designing by revealing. And lastly, I have here inhabiting a shared clock. So the big piece here is the temporariness of the garden is really a core element, I think, of it as a place. Whenever people walk through the gates, we always greet people and we invite them into the calendar of when we are in the time window of our lease. And the temporariness really gives us an opportunity to cut to some really deep, big questions. Because immediately people are like, they're either like, oh, I'm so sad this is going away, or oh, I wish I discovered this earlier. But through not shying away from the expiration date, from the death of the garden, we get to actually speak a lot about what it means to see the beauty in it now, and to care for it now, and to steward it now, because it's really a sort of microcosm of all that we care for in life, and our relationship to the temporariness of it. So we always are inviting people into this shared clock, this shared sense of time, this shared sense of when we are, as they come into the garden space, so that we can together practice the art of gardening and growing, and making something beautiful now, even if it isn't forever. So overall, here's another one of my favorite like before and after shots. The lawn when we're just trying to figure out what it's going to become, and the lawn when it's filled with neighbors and friends for one of our music concert nights. But overall, it's really our approach to community gardening and neighborhood building is that it's about more than just growing the produce and the food to eat, but it's also about growing these artful events and animations and living projects that our neighbors are working on. Because in addition to feeding our bodies, we want to feed our souls and our creative spirits through the project, and invite people into that ability to grow whatever it is that they really want to see come to life, and for this to be a place where their project, their art, their dream can also grow alongside the food.
All right. Okay, Aaron, can I ask you some questions?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so I'll go ahead and ask some questions. I have lots of questions. I want to preserve what you've done. I want to kind of let people know exactly what you've done. So firstly, it must be stunning to walk in the middle of all the hubbub of a city and suddenly find yourself in this little oasis of serenity, peace. It must be very radical. Do you agree that that's the experience? Because it's something that you would not expect at all, and suddenly you find yourself there.
Yeah, oftentimes people come in the gate, the expression I see on their face is like, oh my God, I can't believe this is back here. How did I not know about this? And that's always a really beautiful wonder and joy to greet people in. And I think part of the message of that is like we often make such a strong dichotomy or division separation between city and nature or wild and urban. And I think what the Temperance Garden reveals is that these realms can be closer and more knit into each other than maybe we sometimes think. That even in the middle of the city, you can find the ecology in it, because a city is a part of creation, a part of nature too. It's a part of the local ecology, and so just sharing that with people and showing them that, even though you're in a city, you're still in nature is so important and really beautiful to see people realize as they come into the space, and also really beautiful for me to learn myself, just through experiencing it.
Wonderful. I have 4 sets of questions.
Okay.
The first one is about inspiration, your inspiration. The second one is about the structure of the garden that we went through. The third is about the community impact of the garden. And the fourth one is about your point about temporariness and future. So the time capsule part, let's put it time capsule. So inspiration, structure, community, and time capsule. So inspirations. So you've mentioned that you talked about 2 things. One is Christopher Alexander, and second is the monastery architecture. So can we go one by one? Talk about the influence of Christopher Alexander on this work.
Yeah, for me, I encountered Christopher Alexander long before the garden project. And we were originally considering contracting or hiring a landscape architecture studio to help with working on the site plan and building out the project. And the inspiration from Christopher Alexander was, well, even though we're not professional architects, even though we're not professional builders, there's something in the human soul that knows how to build a living space the same way a spider knows how to weave a web. And that if you trust and you show up with neighbors and friends, and you just begin to start building and moving things around, that you will, it's really more of an allowing than a designing. You will allow a process of life to come into greater aliveness through you as you listen to the place, to the people who want to be there, and play with the possibilities of what it can become. So that was a lot of the inspiration from Christopher Alexander for me. Also deeply inspired by my partner, Josh, who's been working on this project with me since the beginning. And he's drawing really deeply from a world movement called spiritual ecology, which is centered around a magazine, really wonderful magazine called Emergence Magazine. And the heart of spiritual ecology is about relationship, and it's about learning and practicing the art of close observation and close noticing and wonder that allows us to bring us into ever greater care for the surround. So that sensibility of a spiritual ecology is also really core to the place and what it's become. And the second inspiration that you named was, remind me.
The monastery. You started talking about the
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I have always been inspired by the idea of spaces that function as memory devices, or mnemonics. Like an architecture, a building can be a mnemonic device. And oftentimes these are called memory palaces. So I've always thought, like, what if we can make a memory garden? What does a memory garden look like and feel like? a place that helps us remember where we are. So that inspiration comes from just learning about the ars memoria, which is the ancient arts of memory that run all from like Australian Aboriginal cultures, ancient Greece and Rome, through the monastics in the Middle Ages. But the arts of memory is really about allowing the space to speak to the local historical memory. Which is why I was sometimes called a time machine, because the idea is when you enter, you will be transported into the history of what was here before, but will also be now. And it's that sort of layering of many different times all on top of each other that gives you an expanded sense of who you are in relationship to the place.
Wonderful. Now, I want to do a quick recap of the entire garden walk by looking at the structure of the garden. Okay, I noticed 6 things that you mentioned, 6 elements of the structure. Maybe I have missed something. If so, you add it. First one is the welcome circle. Second is the lawn. Third is the pavilion. Fourth is the urban farm. The fifth is the story circle. And sixth is the time capsule. Can you quickly talk about all these 6, and if there are more, anything that I have missed, and what the function of each of it in brief? Please go ahead.
Yeah. So when we first walked into the space at the very beginning, it was what some people call an empty lot or vacant lot, but we call a suppressed lot, because there's a lot of fullness there, but it was not being allowed to express itself because it was being mowed down every week by the previous land management strategy. So when you first walk into the space, it felt really, really small because you could see the back from the front, and it was just one big undifferentiated yard. So one of the big lessons or learnings, insights from Christopher Alexander, is that you have to set up strong centers, kind of the way a campfire functions as a center for a conversation. Everything starts with a strong center, and the center sort of ripples out from its core to create surround the feeling of a place. So the 6 rooms that you mentioned are the 6 centers, which allowed us to differentiate the space within the garden. So it's not just one big blob, but you actually get a feeling of moving through many different vibes, feelings, experiences across the garden, which makes it expand. So the welcome circle, it's about arriving. It's about being able to step into the space without having to commit fully to being there, because there is a second gate, which is more like the more intense threshold that you pass. There's a little free library as well, which allows you to just like browse, grab a book, leave. So the welcome circle, it's like a lobby, it's an arrival. The lawn space, it's the gathering space. It's the largest space that we carved out from what could be meadow. And it's where most of the larger socializing and workshops and classes happen. And it's kind of like an outdoor living room almost, especially now that we have this chandelier hanging above it. The pavilion, this is our cover. It's where you go to be like covered, and the kind of enclosed space, the inside outside. We have a meditation group that meets weekly there, and it's really like a hearth, a space for rest and rejuvenation and restoration. The farm areas where we do all the growing and the vegetable production. The story circle is the place where we gather for sharing our own stories and speaking to the story of the garden, the site itself. And the time capsule is kind of the memory, the archive of the garden, where all the artifacts and mementos are stored. This garden body corresponds to a meditation walk that our neighbor Rachel designed along the length of the garden. But to experience that layer, you'll have to come in person.
Wonderful. Next question is on community. How long have you been doing this, Aaron?
The garden opened in October of 2020. So we're a little bit past 3 years now. In parallel with the garden project, I've also worked on a lot of projects that are more digitally native, more focused on internet community and how we gather online. And so I've really tried to take what I've learned from digital gathering, online community spaces, online gatherings and events, and also bring that to the garden, the experience design of physical events and physical gatherings, because there's often so much energy and attention and capital poured into how do we make really good online gathering experiences and group chat apps and whatever it is. And I think that work is like really important and beautiful. And if we care a lot about the experience of gathering online, we should be equally as invested in what does it mean to make a really beautiful gathering space in person, especially now that the pandemic is more in the rearview mirror. So sometimes I joke that the garden is a social media platform. And since we talk a lot about temperance, originally temperance has to do with our drunkenness on alcohol. But I think temperance in our times has more to do with the way that we're drunk on screen time. And so finding ways to like reconnect and relearn the art of neighborliness and gathering and association has been a big element of the project for me.
Wonderful. So now I'll ask you, this is the hardest question.
Okay, I'm ready.
What have you learned about community? Because it's quite a stunning experiment, and 3 years is a long time. And so you have tried to and achieved a lot of community interaction in this space. So talk a little bit about, what did you discover about community? What was the reactions of people? What are people walking away with, and what are you walking away with? So whichever way you want to proceed, but what is the impact of this garden on the community?
I want to talk about two things. One, I want to talk about toddler height, and two, I want to talk about coupling. So toddler height, we really focused on designing the garden from the point of view of a 3-year-old, because our neighbors' kids were that age when we started. And we're always asking ourselves, what would it feel like to be in the space from 2 feet tall, right? And all these paths that we're carving and these shapes that we're drawing throughout the space, what will it feel like to run around as a little kid throughout the place? And really focusing on the experience and the wonder and the joy of the youngest members of our community, I think brings so much like heart and love and life to it. And to see like our neighbors' kids' first food be a squash that we grew in the garden, and all these kids, city kids who would otherwise think that the food grows off the grocery store shelf, being able to come see how our food goes from seed to fruit to becoming a part of us. I think really like focusing on the kids' experience and play in the garden has been a huge learning, and the beauty of what type of community is possible when you have not just one age group gathering together, but many different people of all ages. The second element, coupling, this is a term that Josh uses a lot in talking about the event design of the garden. And coupling means that no event host is an island unto its own. Nothing is isolated. Everything is remixing or riffing on or cross-pollinating with a pattern, an idea, a workshop that's come before. So for example, we hosted a 5-week ecology series called How to See a Plant. And during the course of that class, one of the students recorded an album that was based on each lesson of the class. He wrote a song for each lesson of the class. And then that album became a listening party in the garden, where we had an event where everyone came together to listen to this beautiful garden grown music. And then that music became a review in the Temperance Alley Garden zine, which we produced and shared with all the neighbors. So all of these different things, the class, the music, the independent publication, the gathering, they're all like woven together and in communication with each other. And so I think what's made the project feel really alive and successful is how good of a job Josh, the main events coordinator, has done at making sure that all of the community projects are in conversation with each other and not just one-offs happening on their own, but are inspiring how each other think about building and growing and working on their creative projects.
Let me talk. This is beautiful. Thank you. Let's talk more about the community. How many people show up? Can you talk a little bit about the events that you've done, just the variety of events, how many people showed up, or do you have people who keep coming again and again and again? Are they one-off? Just what's the nature of the community of this place?
Yeah. Well, it began very small with just 3 or 4 of us sketching, running around the empty space and shouting through the fence at neighbors, "Hey, how you doing?" And then slowly we invited people into the concept of like, this is an outdoor classroom. This is a place where you can come and bring something that you want to share. And so over the last 3 years, we've really seen a lot of people take us up on that invitation. So during our volunteer hours, we usually have between like 20 to 40 people who come and tend to the beds. And at this point in our life cycle, we have an event almost every day now, which is hosted by a different neighbor or organizational partner. So depending on the event, some of them are more intimate, like our meditation circle. It's typically like 10, 12 people. But then the music concert series, which happens once a month, is more in the range between like 50 and 100 people. So it's really a range of like intimate to larger. And there's also a range of like regulars, people who come every day because it's kind of like the backyard, and we're sort of just it's really wonderful. There's a lot of people who I see every day who I don't even have their phone number. But we're always like, in conversation with each other just because we share the place. So yeah, it's like there's like a steady crew of regulars as well as people who come more sporadically for the larger events that we do.
Wonderful. So I'm going to go to my last set of questions about the temporariness and future. And folks would love to hear questions from you. So go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you would like to ask questions. So it's really, really interesting, to kind of say, okay, look, this is limited time frame. And it really focuses your attention when you say that, okay, that's all the time. It's kind of like, it's like life, you have that much life. And it just knowing that you have it, it makes everything more precious, and you work on it. So talk a little bit more about it if you want, and then talk about the future. What do you think? Say, see, now this is done. This will be done. When does it end? What's your end of the lease?
So it was originally supposed to be January of next year, but we just got news that the developer is pushing back the start date of their project, at least through 2025. So the kind of irony of this stance that we've taken of not fighting too hard and not pushing back really hard, has actually prolonged the project.
Nice. Congratulations. That's wonderful.
I kind of think of those like, finger traps where when you pull really hard, you get stuck.
Wonderful. So, I mean, look, I mean, I'm glad that we've got a little bit more time, and we will have many, many opportunities of talking about the future. But what do you think, like, if there is somebody in, some other place like Seattle or somewhere, what do you think, you have shown is possible that most people don't even think is possible? What is the idea here? What is it that what you think you have added to the community, which anybody who wants can do if they so desire?
Yeah. Well, one thing is, this is literally a parking lot, and we set out to make a really livable, beautiful space out of the weeds that grow on top of asphalt. So I think part of the demonstration is like, you don't necessarily even need to buy a lot of like expensive plants. You don't need to like spend a lot of time like digging out the asphalt and starting from scratch. You can work with what's there already, work with the ecology as you encounter it, and still make a beautiful space that people enjoy and want to inhabit. I think the other big element is like, a lot of people at the beginning would always ask me like, why are you doing this? Like, you're gonna get so attached to it and then it's gonna get taken away. That doesn't seem worth it. And just seeing how, like, sometimes we talk about it as a graduate school. It's a 3-year program. We all get to go to Temperance Alley Garden together. We'll graduate and continue to take our learnings elsewhere. And when you have that frame of mind, it's so freeing because there's, yes, an expiration date from the get-go, but I've also just seen so many friends and neighbors like grow and mature into their own projects and interests and expertise. And so I would just tell anybody, like, doesn't matter how much time you think you have or don't have, just go for it, because when you act like you're here forever, you end up creating a type of beauty that's not possible when you assume transience.
Wonderful. I'll just make one comment and then we'll go to questions. The comment I want to make is, I'm going to send you a video that we did yesterday on Louis Sullivan. And he talks his main point there in that opening essay of System of Architectural Ornament is that man's creative ability can turn inorganic into organic, can take a parking lot with weeds on it and make it into a garden that adds so much to lives of people. So it's just wonderful to see you do that. Thank you, Aaron. All right, now let's go to questions. Folks, go ahead and type an exclamation mark to ask questions. We're going to start with Evanik and Joe. Evanik.
Thank you, Aaron, and thank you, Shrikant, for hosting this. And sorry, it was very moving. And I think you actually answered the question that I had. It's like, what are their plans? And the last part though that you talked about was the temporariness of the garden and not focusing on that, or focusing on it, but having a different perspective and not fighting it, and still going through with it anyway, knowing full well it's temporary and the temporariness of life. I thought that was beautiful. Um, so what have you learned for yourself with keeping the mindset of the temporariness of life itself? Um, what is the lesson that you've learned? And what will you take with you from this garden? Which congratulations on it being extended to 2025. I'm so excited.
Hmm. Well, I think the learning, I guess I won't know. I won't know fully. I won't know fully till it's gone what the learning is, having actually experienced the full, death to life cycle.
Let,
But
let me modify the question. Compared to Aaron 3 years ago, before he started,
yeah,
Aaron now, what have you learned from this garden and doing the experience of doing the garden?
mhm. Well, I've learned a lot about the importance of play, and how much unfolds when you like have a playful approach to building and design, and how when you take the kind of the childlike spirit of play that I see in my neighbors' kids and bring it into design process, you end up making something that feels like it maybe doesn't look, professional, but it feels so alive. And I think the other big piece for me is just like learning actually how good it feels to locate my sense of self and soul in a place. I think prior to this project, like the locus of my identity was online in a lot of ways, because I was really active on Twitter and on my own personal website through my writing and blogging and posting, and um, you sort of are where you pour into, where you pour your creative energies into. There your soul is. And I met so many beautiful people, and I have so many beautiful relationships, like with you, Shrikant, from people I've met online. But it's sort of about like, where's the center and where's the edge. And when I'm able to recenter and re-find my sense of home and self in a physical place that I am pouring into, I feel so much more together than I thought was possible when I was really like strung out and relating to my media environment primarily through the screen.
Wonderful. Thank you, Aaron. Next up is Joe, followed by Rupali. Joe.
So, yeah, I think that, I just want to congratulate you on the garden itself, because, I think this is an excellent example of what applied knowledge actually looks like. It's something that it's no longer a philosophy or something that's abstract. You actually made it real. And a lot of people don't necessarily take that time. And I think that, and actually that's something that Louis Sullivan often talks about is, actually applying the what you have learned to the real world. And I think you've done it beautifully. And even the way you described it, applying Christopher Alexander's principles and just making it work for the community. A lot of the questions that I had, you already addressed and regarding community, because I thought that was one of the most important things, is that how you brought the community together. Maybe I'll ask you something a little bit slightly different, but I think you've already answered this as well. Is this something that you see? It's creative, but is it repeatable? In other words, in other areas and other cities, is it something that you feel like, was it unique to your community that people had come together and it just was, something organically and was created? Or do you think that this is something where you can, make some notes and write down some things and perhaps, give other people ideas what to do with open space?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say that the process of listening and unveiling and like treating the site almost like a conversation partner of what do you want to say, what do you, piece of land, want to say with us, community, as we like write this letter together in the form of the environment that we're making. That is a sensibility or a stance that we can and ought to take in relationship with the built environment wherever we find ourselves. And I feel like even if you don't have like a giant vacant lot, something that we always do is we always carry around a little piece of chalk, and you find a spot in your neighborhood. Maybe there's like something you see that you wish were a little different, or something you see that you want to share a little love to and leave a little chalk heart. Like there's the garden project is like a very kind of large, macrocosm of a project, but I think the sensibility starts with just like creative response to what's around you, even in a manner as small as leaving a little chalk heart next to a tree that you really like. And if we can practice that way of relating to what's around, then when the bigger opportunities come, we can also take that stance there as well. So I think there's so many little, like, sometimes people talk about like small acts of kindness, I like to think of like little acts of decoration or little acts of ornamentation where like you place a rock on each corner of a tree box as a way of just like creating a little frame. And there I moved an element in my environment around, and I've changed it, even though it's so small and so subtle and nobody will see it besides you. But that little gesture, that small hint or wink at like, we can actually interact with our environments and we're not just consumers of them, but we are participators in them, is I think like a first step. And I hope that, I don't think this project will be like copy pasted somewhere else, but I think the sensibility, if you show up to, or if we continue to show up to different pieces of land in our area in that way, that whatever emerges from that unique conversation between that piece of land and that community will grow something really beautiful. It'll look really different than Temperance Alley, but will have that seed germ at its core of wonder and listening.
Thank you, Aaron. I want to make a couple of comments. I mean, one thing that is very clear is that you're going to carry this with you, even after the garden is gone. You will have it in you, and so will many of the people who have been working with it. The word that you use, sensibility, I think is a core word, because that's the thing that has actually produced it. And that's the thing that it's going to be transmitted. So many of the people that you've worked with, your neighbors, I think are going to carry a little bit of this sensibility with them. Hopefully some of the kids, your neighbors' kids who are toddlers who have gotten there, are carrying in them something that they would not have had otherwise. And that's probably going to be the most, you know, most pullulating. I'm using the words from Sullivan. It means teeming. You know, it produces the most teeming crop from the seed, because that seed has actually known how to produce things in this local ground. When it is somewhere else, it can do the same thing over there. And the biggest thing we can do, I think, biggest thing is the courage that people will have, so that their vision is not limited by saying that, oh, this is just a parking lot, but saying that with a creative mind, what can you do with anything that you found? So thank you so much. Next up is going to be Rupali. Would love any questions. Go ahead, folks. Type an exclamation mark.
So, Aaron, thank you, and Shrikant, thank you for organizing this talk. So as we speak, I am taking a walk in my community, in my neighborhood, and, you know, the act of just meeting neighbors, we're just passing each other, looking, you know, stopping to pat their dogs or whatnot. And there's a seasonal change. So even like just watching all the houses around here going through that change, otherwise we can be easily bogged down with our computers and create a world of our own in our own heads. So I want to congratulate you on your initiative of starting this garden. And my question to you is, when you did this project, like when you came up with this idea, how did you work with your neighbors to get a buy-in? And when you did that, what were like the time commitments and costs involved? Thank you.
Yeah, so my roommate Benjamin Haynes, he's the one who kind of got the ball rolling on the project. And what he did in terms of buy-in was a local change.org petition. He got a bunch of neighbors to sign it. And then he was very persistent in emailing the developer and continuing to email them until they responded. He spent a lot of time in negotiations with them in terms of our lease agreement, because it's a very unusual agreement between like a very large multinational development company and a very tiny nonprofit neighborhood association. And they had a lot of risk mitigation requests and concerns and things that took a long time to sort of work out. So yeah, it was a combination of, there was the local petition, the contract negotiation with the developer, and then once we actually got the gates unlocked and the contract signed, it was really just a lot of like you said, saying hi to neighbors who are walking by and just engaging in one-on-one conversations about what we're up to. And then I also always chalk, the garden is kind of hidden in this alleyway, and I always chalked the entrance to the alleyways at the beginning of the project, just very subtle markers to see like who is paying close attention, because that was the type of person that we wanted to invite in at the beginning, is somebody who sees something really little and is curious enough to follow into a hidden alley and see what might unfold there. So
wonderful. Thank you, Aaron. Go ahead, Rupali.
So I wanted to ask you about the children's involvement in the garden, because for them, this is just a gift to be able to see all those squashes and things coming up and participating in it. Now, you mentioned about the, so I wanted to ask you, how do you engage children? That's one. The second question I have is the living blueprint. I love that idea, because there are often times we work like that, because it's a more organic way of designing. And how do you facilitate those design ideas where multiple people are giving ideas, and which ideas you go with and which ideas you put on the table and say, all right, we'll come back to it or not?
Mhm. Yeah, so for children, at first it's really just about relationship building and being good neighbors. So when a neighbor comes in with their kids in the garden, just playing with them and their toys and asking them what kind of stuff they want to see or experience in the place. But then this year we've done some more formal engagements with, we have partnership with a few of the local elementary schools, and we've gotten to do some field trips in the garden with the kindergarten classes and the second graders. So that's also been a really fun way of reaching out to kids in the neighborhood and doing some, I love doing the curriculum design for the field trip experiences, because there's so much to play with. And then remind me the second part of your question.
So thank you for sharing that about the students. It's great that you can engage the schools. The second question was the living blueprint, right? That it's an
Right.
way of doing things. So how do you facilitate the conversations about what do we plant and how do we go about this? How do we create the maze, or what materials are going to go in, and who makes these decisions? How do you kind of facilitate the conversation so there are no conflicts but agreements?
Yeah. So at first, when it came to the architectural layout of the place, we start with materials that are so like cheap and so low fidelity that any change or proposal is like very easily deconstructed or taken down. So initially it's just like none of the living blueprints are really high commitment or expensive, and so they allow you to facilitate a conversation because you get to speak with each other inside of the blueprint and understand how it feels. So that was a very playful process of just like trying things, taking them down, putting them in other arrangements. And then when things get more built up, we have a little bit more of an organizational like process and structure. So we're operating inside of a 501c3 nonprofit, and the nonprofit has committees. So there's a committee of neighbors who have signed up to be involved in the budgeting process, the like event organizing, more of the behind the scenes like administration and logistics of the garden. So that group of people comes together twice a month to talk about logistics, talk about budget, what we want to see for the next month, figure out the calendar, and then also to do some of the story keeping and archiving and reflecting of what's been happening in the space and what could be going better and what do we want to keep doing.
Thank you, Aaron. Thanks, Rupali. Great questions. Our friend Sam from London has a question. He can't ask it, in audio. So I'm going to paraphrase his question. Where does Marshall McLuhan fit into this? I know you're very familiar with Marshall McLuhan. So tell me how Marshall McLuhan would look at what you're doing.
Oh, Sam's really tempting me to talk for another hour.
I don't mind. Nobody minds, so go ahead.
Well, I think one way is that the Marshall McLuhan always talks about media as extensions of our body, and things that we put on. And I think one big way McLuhan has influenced me in thinking about garden design is he's made me understand that a place is also an extension or a piece of clothing that you put on. And when I walk into the place, I experience the garden as a communication medium, because when I walk in, I feel like I am meeting all the people who come in through the medium of the garden, the way that I'm meeting you all through Zoom, or the way that I'm meeting a long distance friend through a handwritten letter. And because of the like affordances and layout and like architectural design of the place, it allows me to, the image in my head is like the voice, what's it called, like a transducer, where you speak and then it sounds different when it comes out the other side. I feel like I speak with and through the garden as a medium, and that allows for a different genre of interaction or different possibilities of relationships or types of conversations to emerge that would not otherwise emerge if I was not using that medium of communication, if I was not in the garden. So that's a one piece.
Let's try to put another piece. Let's look at the tetrad. What is this? What does this garden retrieve? What does this garden enhance? What does this garden displace? And what happens when it flips? So most importantly, what is it retrieving?
I think it retrieves a monastery. It's a non-commercial space. It's open. It is a learning environment, and it's an environment for the cultivation of memory. And I think those qualities of it retrieve a kind of, a kind of monastic experience, maybe as closest as you could get to like being in a monastery, like in the heart of the party street on the city.
Beautiful. What does it enhance?
I would say it enhances awareness of the nature in the city. And when you leave the garden, when you walk back into the regular city block, you see the wild elements poking through in a new light.
Wonderful. I would say it's nature and community. There is some major extension of community taking place here.
Yeah, it definitely enhances like shared presence.
What does it displace?
I think there's a few different answers to this. I think it's partly obsolescing like next door, or like digitally mediated neighborhood communications. I think it also, for some people, displaces like private house parties, private gathering, because all of our gatherings are open to the public. So we ask if somebody comes to us with like a request for a private reservation, we say, well, what if you took that and you try to think about how to make it open to the public? And so this event that starts as like a private thing for just my friends transforms into a public facing thing that anybody's invited into. So obsolescing the private reservation.
Right. Hardest part, flip.
Oh man, I think that in some ways it flips back into parking lot because with so much usage, there's actually a lot of erosion and all of the old like asphalt and rocks is like being re-exposed. So I imagine if it was here for, 10 years, it would probably like everything would get re-exposed that had been covered up by regeneration. And then I think it also I guess the literal answer is that it flips into houses.
Yes, excellent. Thank you, and thank you for just taking this, pop quiz. McLuhan. Next up, and thank you, Sam. Great bringing up McLuhan here. Very, very much to the point. Next up is going to be Katie, followed by Joe. Folks, if you have questions, go ahead and type an exclamation mark.
I go to a teaching garden on Saturdays too here in San Francisco, and it seems like a lot of the people like either go to like learn how to garden, or they're also just lonely, and so they're like, well, how do I find community? And what for you is like something that's like individual about it? Because there's like a community aspect for you. What would be something that, do you ever spend time in the garden doing solo or?
Yeah, my favorite new activity of doing solo in the garden is this thing called bugs under bricks, which is where you just pick up any brick in the garden and underneath you find a whole world of tiny insects, and it's like a little portal to a whole nother scale of life. So just picking up a brick and watching the insects underneath. Or we also have a lot of magnifying glasses in the garden, and I love to just pick a piece of grass or a little flower and just like sit and look at it. And then I also do a lot of earlier in the year I was doing a lot of qigong in the garden. Was my one of my solo things, just like a meditative movement practice is how I liked to spend some time alone in the place.
Thank you, Katie. Next up is going to be Joe. If anybody else has any questions, go ahead and type an exclamation mark. Sure.
One of the things that I think that is actually really unique and I think really helpful is the story circle. And I was just wondering, how has that kind of brought the community together in the sense that, everybody's sharing their stories, their backgrounds. I mean, in some ways, it's actually, I've seen situations where that's actually connected to well-being. But I was just wondering, that if what role does it play? How has it impacted the community? How has it strengthened the community?
Yeah. Story Circle is a gift from my partner Josh. He led a lot of story circles as part of high school mental health program that he taught on the West Coast. And so that was one of the things that we knew that we wanted to have in the garden, was like a room that was dedicated to the practice of story circle. And it's played a few different roles. Like one is like an activity or a place, a game where people can get to know each other. And that happens through like a story circle event where a facilitator will bring a prompt, and then people will all like share stories in response to that prompt. And that's kind of like a standalone event that that Josh has hosted in the past. Another role it plays is weekly in the new gardener orientation. I lead a little orientation tour every Saturday for all the new people, and part of that tour happens in the story circle. And I always ask people this question that I learned from a mentor, Denny Ruggieri, who's a landscape architecture professor. And he asks, what's a landscape from your childhood that left a deep impression on you? And so in the story circle, we all get to reflect on that question together. And it's a nice way of, it's a nice way for people who are brand new to the space and to each other to like get to know each other a little. And then the third way that's used is through the organizing team for the garden. There's a monthly meeting that takes place in the story circle, which we call story keeping. And that's where we do reflection on all the events that have happened, and also submit things to our time capsule archive together.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Next up is going to be Evanik.
Hi, Aaron. Two things. I have a comment and a question. So when you called, when you were going through the garden earlier and you were showing where the asphalt is and you were saying it's like a scar, and the thing I was thinking about was like scars protect the land while it protects a person while they're healing, right? Like, so, you know, you're healing and it forms a scar. And I was thinking of that, like that being the healing force to the community, because before it just, for a lot of people, it just looked like a patch of like nothing, and you know, kind of gross, and it probably had like trash and stuff, right? And you saw, and you and your team and you and your community saw the beauty in that, right? You know, we can heal it. But my question is with the time capsule, where do you guys think you're going to put it once, you know, once the land is being rebuilt and townhouses are put on there? Like, are you gonna have a specific place where it goes, or?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so when I joined the neighborhood association, I received a giant box. And the neighborhood association has been around since the early 90s, and this box was filled with all of the old newsletters they used to distribute in the early 2000s, all of various like pamphlets and flyers and posters from the beginnings of the neighborhood association. And that's the beautiful thing about, I think, like a institution, even if it's small, is like institution gives you the possibility of institutional memory, and the organization becomes like this arc. Even though I wasn't even born when the neighborhood association first came online, I'm now like holding this archive. So I'm partly placing some faith in the like institutional continuity, institutional memory of our little association, that there will be people, neighbors after me who want to like pass on and carry on the archive. But the other experiment that we're doing, which I can show you a little image of, it's a digital archiving experiment, which we're doing with my friends at USB Club. And the idea here is that we want to basically give people the ability to carry a little slice of the archive with them in their pocket. And so we set up this thing that's called a USB ATM. And it looks like this. And the way it works is you come with your USB and you do what's called a file harvest. So you plug in your USB to one of the ports, you type in your code, and then we drop you on your USB a little digital piece of the archive. So we have some live audio from music in the garden, some art that people have made in the garden, some documentation, of like the history of the garden. And then it prints out a little receipt that's like a little souvenir to take home with you of where you got the files and when. So for us, it's a way of interacting with the digital world while keeping it tactile and place-based. You had to be there to get the files.
Wonderful. I love that. And I'm going to send you the video, this video, as to be put in the time capsule, because it definitely belongs there.
Nice.
So so Erin, let's try to wrap up. I do want to take some, I want to wrap it up well. So firstly, this is just incredible. I'm just completely blown away by what you and everybody, in your neighborhood has done. And it just is an illustration of what, one person can do. Wait a minute, Christopher Zeloff has something. Christopher, go ahead.
Yes, good to hear this program. I did a film about 10 years ago called City 21 that feels like a parallel universe to what he's doing. Show a picture of it. Here it is, City 21. Covered a project in Chile called The Road That's Not the Road. And another one was called L'Enfant Memory Theater, which took place in Washington, D.C. I'll share the film with you eventually. I'm an independent filmmaker, 63 years old, so I feel like seeds were planted and you're taking it to a new place. And I'm happy to see that. Are you familiar with Francis Yates' work on memory theaters?
Yes,
the art of memory.
Francis Yates.
Yes?
Yeah, I've done a lot of reading of Francis Yates. I really love her work.
All right, because you definitely took it to a new place. Memory theaters are an architecture, and the Road That's Not the Road was actually part of a architecture school in Santiago, Chile. So I'll try and get my name in the chat. Maybe I can send you a copy. So a whole school came out of that approach.
Oh, wow.
I don't know if I don't remember the author's name, but it was MIT Press.
Yeah, that would be wonderful to read. Thank you.
And
Glad to hear that you're doing this. I guess my question is on Francis Yates, and you answered it. So I'm feeling like there's a continuity in the universe, and thank you for being young and making it happen.
thank you, Christopher. Can you talk a little bit about your experience with Buckminster Fuller and your thoughts about transforming the city that you've been working on? Erin, Christopher did a presentation here. He's a filmmaker and he's done a presentation. So I want to do a little bit of cross-pollination here. So this is also a community, and we have, I really love this. So Christopher, could you talk a little bit about
well, Buckminster Fuller, of course, opens up the space for design to happen in new ways, and we don't have to be caught in the professional trap of joining a guild and, as Emerson said, paying so much for tuition when we can rely on intuition. And it's kind of hacking higher education, as Bucky was so good at, and taking design out of the hands of the so-called professionals who turn in very programmed work. So, the spirit of design revolution and the spirit of community development is alive in new ways. And so I think the youth needs to pick up on that. And I'm glad to see you're doing that. So it's another example, and the best design happens, I think, through community, we might want to say, and bringing in lateral thinking from many different sources. So I applaud you for that. I thought it was Philadelphia when I looked at the first pictures of that neighborhood. Where actually is that near? That's not near DuPont Circle, is it?
It's pretty close to DuPont Circle. It's on U Streets and 13th Streets Northwest, near the Ben's Chili Bowl and the African American Civil War Memorial.
Okay, well, I'll have to check it out. Has anybody from the outside community picked up on it?
You mean like news?
News or people in different walks of life from different places in Washington?
Yeah, we've had a lot of student journalists actually, and we've done one or two like city newspapers, but mostly trying to live the story and tell it later.
Okay. Well, there's definitely a project that needs to continue there, and I'm glad to see you're doing it. And yeah, of course, Bucky is somebody who would love it in terms of the spontaneous design that's happening.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you, Christopher. Thank you for your comments. Really, really appreciate that. So, Aaron, I want to continue. Along the lines that Christopher is talking about. I mean, one of the really remarkable things here is that power of design is within each of us, and actually, when we put our own hands into the dirt and start designing together, something really magnificent can come up, which is living and which actually serves us much better than quote unquote professional design. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's really astounding to see how the place really feels like a living being now. Like it really has a life of its own. And it's at the stage in its maturation where like it kind of feels like it's learning to walk or it's like walking away. So yeah, it's like in the beginning you sort of know everything that is happening in the place, and you're trying to just plant tiny seeds and hope that some of them sprout. And now the place is so beyond me or any of the other organizers. Like it has so many stories and interactions that I will never hear of or know about. And that's a really beautiful thing to just be participating in it and not be overstanding it.
Why did you do it, Aaron? It's a lot of work. What motivated you to say, like, I'm going to do this?
It's so fun. And I believe in loving our neighbors as ourselves, and this felt like a way of enacting that prayer. And I really never thought that I'd have the chance to like have a landscape canvas like this, and to just get out and play and build the way you do when you're building a fort when you're a little kid. It's just like brings a lot of joy and wonder into life that wasn't there for me when I was stuck inside for most of the day.
There's just so many interesting points that you made, by the way. I want to pick up on a few of those. One of them is kind of designing it for kids, and then adults kind of actually it works very well for adults. When you're designing it for adults, many times it doesn't work for adults either. But it's like if you're designing it for the kid, you're designing for kid in you as well. And you're actually going back and forth with, kids running through the place and reacting to it and learning from that. So and anything more on that kind of the kids angle, I think looks like that has been a core part of the design. You kind of built in the kid, because I can see that in your own enthusiasm for this. When you said that this is a lot of fun, this is exactly like a kid saying that, oh, and you talked about play, sense of play. And that's a very profound thing, play. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think play is the through line with the events that I personally host in the garden. And I kind of think a lot about what it would be like to make a playground for adults. And so specifically the cloud watching club event that I do, it's very cheeky, it's very playful. We have little bamboo telescopes that I give out to everybody, which we call the monoscope. So you can look up at the clouds and see a little differently. And I have a little like headset mic, and I sort of pretend like I'm a planetarium tour guide, taking people on a celestial journey, narrating the performance of the clouds play. And I think a big part of creating a like adult playground is just giving a sense of permission. It's like I of course could always lay back and watch the clouds, but I think of my event designs as like a permission slip, where now you have the enough of the frame and enough of the context to just like do it, even though it feels kind of weird, and then it's so wonderful and playful that it can like seep into other parts of your daily noticings as well.
Wonderful. Thank you. I think Bill had a question. Bill, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I arrived an hour and a half late, so I apologize for being late, and I'm sorry I missed your presentation, Aaron. But I did live in Lanier Heights near Adams Morgan 3 decades ago when I worked at the Brookings Institution. So
Wow.
I just looked at the Google Maps for 13th Street and U Street intersection, and it's not far from Lanier Heights. So yeah, here's the question I wanted to ask. People in DC, in the policy community and in general in the United States often lived very intellectualized lives, but then do other things in parks to get more embodied and have a more embodied experience. And I've lived in Los Angeles for 30 years next to a big park that I take walks in every day to see, what people are doing. I mean, well, just for my own relaxation and stuff. But the point that I'm trying to make to ask the question is, do the participants in your activities in this space ever report, that it's rejuvenating in the sense that it gets them out of their heads and into their bodies, and which is really a different way of moving through the world, even through one's day at work, a more embodied space, headspace, so to speak. And you mentioned the so-called noticings. It's like you notice more when you're present and you're in your body than when you're off in your head intellectualizing or whatever. So do people report that the activities in your garden space have made a difference in their lives to live more embodied lives and being more present to what's happening right here, right now? Yeah, I'll stop there.
Yeah, multi-sensory incarnations. It's a big focus, a big theme, in terms of the vibe that we're trying to generate. And I often hear from people just like the feeling of relief of like, oh, that was so fun, or like I am glad that I am like out of my head and I can just like touch grass and get my hands a little dirty. I think the funny thing about the way that social life and culture has kind of evolved in the garden is like I really don't know very much about what people do professionally outside of the garden. There's always so much like happening and so much to do and so much to get into that conversations around people's work lives like almost never comes up. So it's a really it's a very I guess refreshing, or I think unique way of relating that happens in the place, because people are able to grow a part of themselves that's not so closely tied up with their job or what they do for a living. And I think that's also kind of a relief of like, oh, I can be somebody beyond my employment.
Thank you, Aaron. So what are some of the feedbacks that you've gotten? What are some of the more interesting feedbacks you've gotten about the garden, about what the garden has done for people? What have you heard?
I get a lot of feedback from people who are new to the neighborhood, didn't really know like how to meet people, where to meet people, how to learn about where we are. And it's been a place where people have made some of their first friendships when they moved to the city, is a big piece. Also just like seeing, we produced a zine as a neighborhood, which is like an independently published mini magazine. And through that, just like seeing all the art that people have made and the writings they produce, I think a lot of the feedback has been around like how good it feels to have a gathering place that isn't asking anything of you, like, or in the sense that's not transactional. Like, we don't charge for events, we don't do ticketing or anything like that. You're just there. You get to just kind of be. But it's somewhere between like a public park and a backyard. It kind of sits in the middle of that spectrum, because there's always like a facilitator or a host or somebody animating the place, keeping the coals alive and inspiring a certain type of activity or making together. So whenever we are open and doing events, it's you always feel, I think, like held. And that's like, I think that's really fun for people.
I want to make a comment about your comment about it's somewhere between the backyard and the public park. As best as I can understand it from everything that you've said, it is actually a combination of the two, of the backyard and the public part. It's like a and, because it has, and it produces something which is completely different than either of those places. So it's like a third place, if you will, where
Right.
have the sense of community that you have in a backyard, something analogous to that. You have the openness and complete welcoming of a public place, but it also has the community. So it is something different.
Yeah. I think originally the place is fenced off, and originally I wanted to like tear down the fences, was my first impulse. But now that we've had them for a while, there's only one gate at the entrance, and I think the fences actually, and they make it feel like an outdoor room, and that contributes to the energy of the social gatherings that happen in the place. It's like you're inside but you're outside at the same time. And yeah, it's that meeting ground between public park and backyard, where unlike a public park, you're not anonymous, completely anonymous to the other people who are there with you. And the culture is one of just like introducing yourself and being able to go up to somebody that you don't know and say hello, which is sort of not allowed, at least in DC, in the public parks. You're not going to be going up to strangers and making a new friend, generally speaking.
Yeah, so it's like that's just like a backyard, it's like friends that don't know each other have been invited into this backyard, and that interaction beautiful. I want to run through the structure of the garden one more time from a new perspective now, because I want to emphasize it 3 times. So one, you actually saw it, then we gave a summary of it. Now I want to talk about it in a slightly different way to close it off. I really like the welcoming circle, because that is like an antechamber, because really you're making a very big transition from the hub of the street, kind of impersonality of the city street, where you don't know anybody, to a new space. And it makes sense to have an intermediate place where you enter that, you pause there for some time, and then you decide that you're going to go in. And it's a conscious choice. So I like just the architecture. I mean, I love that part, that, okay, I'm making a transition and I'm making it consciously into this public, real community. So I'm basically joining this community for this period of time, and that's my choice. And it's so different from that. So I like that part. The pavilion. So let's look at pavilion, the story circle, and the lawn. Okay, because farming has a different characteristic, time capsule has a different characteristic. So let's look at those things, right? The lawn for large events, pavilion as a resting restoration place, and story circle as a fairly intimate conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So I like those 3 things. So talk a little bit about the function of those 3 things relative to each other, and how do people actually end up using those three spaces?
Mm-hmm. So as you said, the story circle is most intimate. It's enclosed in the dome, and then it's also surrounded by a lot of growth. So it's kind of like an interior chamber, or you feel the most, you feel like you've entered kind of into the most secret space in the garden. And because you've crossed so many thresholds to get there, by the time you are there sitting down, you've made a big commitment to the people that you're with, to yourself, and to the place. And I think that also makes room for a little bit more vulnerability than maybe is possible in the more like accessible spaces.
I know I want to make a comment. I know all of these are your children, so sorry about the preference that I'm it looks like that is the inner sanctum, because you are really creating a community. You're really creating a community, and that's the place where the most intense kind of community interaction is. So I see it as being kind of this kind of the sanctum. It's like, it's the kind of the center of kind of community building, where people are actually going face to face. Lawn events are much more public events. It's like
Right.
any kind of transmission taking place. Pavilion is for rest, but the community circle is the story circle is for that community. And because the heart of what you're really building is community in nature, I think that I see it as being a special, kind of that's almost the center of the whole thing.
Yeah, I think that it's the most enclosed, so it feels, yeah, like the inner sanctum. And then the pavilion is also somewhat intimate, but it's way more accessible, and you can it doesn't feel like a room with the door closed. It feels more exposed and open, and anybody can walk up and join, and that feels like it's more public in that way. And then, yeah,
How do people use the pavilion?
pavilion. The pavilion is used every week for the meditation group. They meet there. It's also kind of like where people gather after the harvest to taste things, try things out, socialize, get shade on the really sunny days. And then we do also like a lot of the chalk decorating happens in the pavilion as well. So where people get to leave their mark.
Wonderful. All right. So Aaron, thank you. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this. This is very, very special. And I'm going to send you the recording of this for, to put in your time capsule.
Wonderful. Thank you, Shrikant. Really appreciate you and your amazing organizing.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.